Welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast, where women 60 and beyond redefine work with purpose and confidence. I'm Nigel Rawlins, your guide to building a resilient career through self-employment, consulting or new ventures. Each episode delivers practical strategies, expert insights and intellectual capital to master business, marketing and technology while staying mentally sharp and aligned with your goals. We'll explore networked entrepreneurship, authentic branding, AI-powered work, cognitive vitality and resilient transitions to unlock opportunities and create a future filled with impact. Join me to transform your experience into a thriving, purpose-driven career. This is Wisepreneurs. Let's get started. In your 60s, you bring more than experience. You bring a rich network of relationships that can power a bold new business chapter. Today on Wisepreneurs, I'm joined by Laetitia Vitaud, a widely respected author and thought leader on the future of work from a feminist perspective. Together, we explore a compelling truth. Your network may be your most valuable entrepreneurial asset. As Laetitia says, the most important asset to start a business isn't cash, it's the relationships you've nurtured. Join us as we uncover why connection, not capital, is the real currency of entrepreneurship in today's networked world. Laetitia, welcome back to the Wisepreneurs podcast. You've been on episode 6 and episode 19, so this is your third episode. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Laetitia, could you tell us something about yourself and where you're from?
I'm half German, half French, and I lived in the UK for 5 years. Then I lived in Germany for 5 years, and now I'm back in my home country, France, and very happy to be back. I've finally accepted that that's who I am. I am French.
So whereabouts in France are you?
In Paris. Well, near Paris, actually, yeah.
So it's a very busy part of France.
Very busy part, and I'm to the west of Paris, which gets me closer to Normandy. And Normandy is where I have a little house and a very big garden and a lot of peace and quiet when I want it. When I want to spend days reading and walking and thinking, that's where I spend most of my time.
So how often do you go there?
Ideally, it would be once a week. In reality, it's more like once every 2 weeks because my children, who are now in their teenage years, they want to stay in Paris. And so if I want to have time with them, I stay with them in Paris.
So how old are they now?
13 and 16.
Oh, golly. They're important ages, aren't they?
Yes.
And do they get around by themselves quite easily?
Oh, yes, completely. They're used to it. When they were in London, they already took the bus on their own. And then in Munich, they got around the city on their own. And now, Paris is also quite familiar to them. So they have this ease of understanding metro networks and public transportation. Because when you have the cognitive training of doing it in multiple cities, it gets easier to understand how it works, to understand, how you get from one place to the other. And reading a map, even if it's a digital map, it's something that they are pretty good at. I think that's good cognitive training they had from changing cities.
Do they speak 3 languages?
Oh, yes, they do. They speak it so well that you cannot guess where they're from. So their English sounds English, their German sounds German, and their French sounds French. Now, the thing with trilingual people is usually they have a little less vocabulary than people their own age who only speak one language. So it's true. I know they also make small grammar mistakes in each of the 3 languages, but still everybody would love to speak those 3 languages as well as they do. I'm very jealous of them.
Wow, they're going to have an interesting future.
Well, we'll see. I don't know how much of an asset it is today, but maybe it still is. I mean, in the age of having everything translated automatically, being able to speak it without the need for a smartphone or any app is probably also getting deeper into cultural differences and not just the linguistic aspect of communication, but really understanding like body language and the little things that are not recorded by machines. So probably they will have something that may be a strong asset when the purely linguistic aspect of things can be automated. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much of an asset it is.
Well, I was reading something the other day about how difficult it is to train somebody up who speaks only English. For example, if you want to be a spy, to be able to speak another language and really be able to live that language in that new location. Apparently it is very, very, very difficult. It can take many years. So we just assume, oh yeah, I can learn that language fairly quickly. But to live using that language in another culture is very difficult. So do they like school?
They do. It's challenging because they've changed systems multiple times, and not only does the language change, but also the curriculum. But now they will stay with the French system and try to go to the baccalaureate. At some point, you have to stop switching the systems, otherwise you can never get to university. So now we're aiming for some stability, and so that they can thrive. Because the challenges of changing systems in teenagers is not something I recommend. Teenagers need some kind of stability, which is what we're aiming for now that we moved back to France.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. All right, let's start with the nature of work. We've spoken about the future of work in the past, but obviously that future is here now. And one of the things I think you talk about is you see it as an age of individuation and networks, that it's not a mass economy or a factory type system anymore, though I think sometimes we still treat people like it's a factory system, but it's a knowledge economy. So networks have become important. Obviously, intelligence seems to be in the network itself. How can we leverage networks and engage in relational work and pay attention and look after each other in a knowledge economy? What do you think is happening there?
Yes, interestingly, the jobs that have multiplied the most over the past few years and that are likely to continue to multiply are relational jobs, and mostly care work, but also I include in care work actually the job that consists in selling something to someone else, because selling, when it's done well, is about caring for that person, listening to their needs, understanding what they will need, and creating trust and developing a relationship with a lot of trust. It's not selling something people don't need and being a crook, but rather generating trust. Those are jobs that have multiplied the most. So you have what you just referred to as knowledge work. So creative work, people who do podcasts like you, whether it's professional or just for pleasure. It's people who do accounting, people who do marketing. I mean, we have all these jobs, executives and the rest of them. And then you have people who serve them. People who work in restaurants, people who work in all kinds of hospitality jobs, childcare, elderly care, healthcare, cleaning, all those jobs. And the ratio in the densest areas, like the big cities that I inhabit, is 1 to 5. For one knowledge worker, you have about 5 people who work in proximity services. So people who serve, care for, people who teach, etc. And that is the situation that we're in. And we have a lot of blind spots when it comes to understanding the trends, because there is usually a very big focus on knowledge workers. And we see things changing very fast with the rise of generative AIs and all the tools that we have, and how these jobs are being transformed very fast. And what we don't see, the blind spot that we have, is the massive numbers of care workers, hospitality workers, cleaning workers, etc., whose job is less affected by the rise of generative AI, or more indirectly affected by the rise of generative AI. And what we're obsessed with is that we're afraid that the knowledge work will not be valued as much, because a lot of the tasks that are in those jobs can be automated. And we're less interested in care work and hospitality work and restaurant work and cleaning work, because it's already valued very little. It's not paid much. in one word. And so we don't see what is happening with it. And the trend may be that all work could be paid less in the future. Not necessarily disappear, but be paid less. And that, I think, is the anxiety, the main root of all the anxiety that we feel. Are we going to be valued enough to be paid enough to have a good life? That's how I sum up the main fear, perhaps, that we have. We intuitively know that there will be work in the future, but will this work be paid enough for us to have a good life?
And will it be meaningful work?
Well, it is meaningful to care for others and to focus on the relational aspect of work, focus on building trust in relationships. It is meaningful, but it can be work that's organized in a way that's exhausting. If there's a lot of emotional work in the work that you do, for example, nurses who work with people who suffer, people who are in pain, there's no problem with the meaning of it. There's a problem with, can you do emotional work for 8 or 10 hours a day? And that's usually not something that is possible. And the main narrative around AI and the transformation of work was, if you automate the tedious, boring, routine tasks, then you are left with the more meaningful aspect of work. You are left with either the creative dimension or the emotional dimension. But whether it's creative work or emotional work, that's not something you can do all day. You need to balance it out with stupid tasks for it to be sustainable. And we're not taking that direction. We're not really challenging the number of hours you work. And well, that to me is an interesting question about how we organize work so as to make it more sustainable, so as to make it into something that you can do for 5 days a week or 4 days a week and for 40 something years in your entire career. And we're not there yet, I think. We haven't answered all those questions yet.
Yeah, one of the things I think I'm seeing, especially some of those caring relational jobs, is understaffing, deliberately understaffing, so that the level of care is reduced because they're running from, say, patient to patient or in a care home between people living there, which I've seen with my mother, that, it took a bit of time to get somebody because they had less people. And then finding the particular workers in the first place and making sure they're trained enough and paid enough. So, yeah, that's huge. Let's go back to this relational part. And I think that is critical. It goes into every job, I think, now in terms of relational, that any, say, knowledge worker, even an accountant or a lawyer or any professional, has to be able to relate to other people because they're not working on their own, really. They're working in a network. And that's where I think a lot of things are happening. So what do you reckon in terms of relationships and stuff like that? If you wanted to start a business, how important are relationships? I'm talking about for women, say, who are a bit older and don't want to continue working.
That's the most important asset to start a business. How many people do you know? How varied is the network that you have so that it can help you find ideas of what you do in your new business, or help you find new clients, or help you find the suppliers that you will need. It's how varied this network and how solid all those relations. That's the main asset to start a business today, because there's less capital involved in most activities. I mean, it depends on what you do. Obviously, if you start a store selling something, you'll need the store, and then there's real estate involved. But if you are in knowledge work, there is a lot less capital required to start a business now. I mean, the only capital you need is enough money to not need a wage for a couple of months so as to, have the time to generate revenues with your activity. But apart from that, there is no capital involved. You don't need an office. The computer you probably already have. The few apps and tools that you need, you can start with free ones to begin. So there is no capital, but there is absolutely the need to have already a network. If you work in B2B, Maybe the companies that employed you in the past can be your first customers, the first people you will speak to develop an offer that will make sense on the market. So to be relevant in whatever business you want to start, you need to have those conversations with the people who you will target in your activity. And that starts with the network that you have. It can be multiple different circles. It can be the people you worked with in the past. It can be the people who work with your children now. It can be your neighbors. It can be your family. It can be your friends. The trick is to develop those relationships with care, or maintain those relationships with care. And that's something you need to continue to do all your life. And we're faced sometimes with the question of how many relationships can you maintain in your life? And there is only a limited number of relationships we can really, really look after. There was this number, the Dunbar figure. So Robin Dunbar, Dunbar, was this British anthropologist who studied apes, and he studied humans the way he studied apes, and came up with this figure, which is roughly 150. And his definition was, the Dunbar figure refers to the number of relationships that you can cultivate in such a way that not only will you know all those names, but also the names of their spouses or their children. Well, perhaps not all the birthdays, but if you bump into them casually somewhere unexpectedly, you will want to go to a bar or a cafe and have a conversation with them and feel that level of intimacy that defines a strong relationship. And he says, well, 150 is the maximum. And that's probably still true. But one, that's something that you can expand and work on. And two, with the social networks, digital networks, and AI and automation, maybe you can make that number a little bit larger. So train your memory of all those people regularly. You look at the birthdays every day and send a little message, something that will be individualized. Write private messages on some of these apps on a regular basis. Think about those people. That's the positive thing about networks like Instagram that are heavily criticized these days for being a huge or massive waste of time, which I agree they are. But if you look at the networking aspect of it, if you use it in such a way as to keep in touch with the number of people that matter to you, then it's not always bad. So yeah, that's the number one asset. Cultivating this network of 150 plus people, depending on how you can increase the Dunbar figure.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because to do that, it's work and it's attention. You have to say, I'm not going to scroll through Twitter like I do sometimes. I have to focus on the things that are important. And if you're going to start a business, that is the core of it. If you can't relate to people, you're not going to get the trust that you need. So let's go on to now about developing a narrative about yourselves. We just talked about relationships, well, the relational aspect of being in a business, but who you are, not necessarily in a business, but in the work that you do. Just like all of that relational stuff is very important if you're still working, but more so if you want to go out for yourself. But now let's talk about who you are as a person in this business or starting a business. So, and I think we were talking about this before, is that we do make multiple transitions throughout our lives. So let's talk a little bit about that. Stay inspired with the Wisepreneurs newsletter. Every week I share exclusive strategies on business, marketing and tech for women 60 and beyond, drawn from over 67 podcast episodes and 100 articles. Visit wisepreneurs.com.au to sign up and get my free career reinvention checklist today. Don't miss out.
So these two great thinkers I admire, Andrew Scott and Linda Grattan, they wrote nearly a decade ago this brilliant book called The 100-Year Life. And if I were to sum it up in a couple of sentences, I would do it like this. We're moving from a world that was, by and large, a 3-stage life. First, you trained, then you worked, and then you were retired. And those 3 stages were very separate, and they all had their institutions to support them, like, schools in the first stage and companies in the second, and pension systems or even pension homes in the third. And what's been happening over the last couple of decades is that we're transitioning to a multi-stage life where people train multiple times or all the time throughout their lives. They work for much longer because they have not only longer lives, but longer work lives. In the meantime, the life expectancy of companies and business models and skills has become shorter and shorter. So whatever it is that you do as a job may not be something that you will be able to do and make a living with for 4 decades, for 40 years. And then the last stage, retirement, there are so many more different ages, so much more age diversity that if you're in your late 60s, you may still be very active and support someone older, someone from the generation above you, who may face health difficulties and not have as much independence. And then sometimes you even have a generation above that one. So possibly up to 3 generations above the legal age of retirement. And that's unprecedented in human history. So we have so many generations in the population, so much age diversity, and so many transitions in that multi-stage life where you change jobs, you change your situation, you become a caregiver, you go back to work, and then you work part-time, and then you have cancer. Maybe you stop working, but then you get better, and then etc. And so this situation where you had a stage and a life situation and an identity that fit that stage, that's no longer possible. So there are so many transitions and so many different ages and so many life situations that the question is, who am I? If each stage, comes with different challenges and you develop different skills for each of these stages, it does ask the question, or it does come with the question, who am I when I change life so often, or when I change jobs multiple times? This sense of identity is no longer a given. It was not a question that you had to ask when you had a more linear career and where each next step was pretty obvious and didn't come with those challenging questions. Because now, probably more freedom in where to go next, or at least a sense of freedom. But this sense of freedom also produces a lot of anxiety. If I can do everything, theoretically, what am I going to do? How do I make the choice that I need to make for the next stage of my life? It's like going to the supermarket and picking a brand of toothpaste. There's so much choice, so much freedom, you don't know how to choose. So you have this paralysis of choice. And that can apply to your own life. And it's both exhilarating to be able to do so many things for many more years than our ancestors, but it can also be terrifying. So knowing who you are, which can come with simple things like knowing what you don't like, can help narrow down the options to make the choices easier and to avoid choice paralysis. Here's what I don't like. I don't like being an employee and being told to go to a meeting at 6 p.m. That's for the French, who have a lot of meetings late at night. So I know that what matters to me is autonomy. Or it can be, I like learning all the time. So I want to be in a situation where I can spend a lot of time reading or a lot of time speaking to other people. Well, you basically narrow down and you have a better sense of what you like, what you don't like, what you are good at, what you are less good at, and what feels comfortable. And we've criticized and decried the notion of comfort, like this cliche expression to get out of your comfort zone. Don't know if you've heard it. I recently wrote the preface, a foreword to a book called Let's Exploit Our Comfort Zone rather than get out of it. Being comfortable means being good at something, being efficient at something. So understanding what works for you will make it easier for you to go further, to do better, to do more, and to feel good about it. And after all, that's what we all want, to feel some degree of comfort.
You know, that strikes me that what it sounds like is from a younger age, need to be exploring these things and just not going along with the flow. Obviously, I think for women, if they would have children or not have children, or as you mentioned, having elderly parents, so their transitions change, but somehow they have to find that core of who they are. Do you recommend, say, getting a coach or reading particular books or keeping a journal to help them get a sense of who they are?
Absolutely. And there is a reason why the coaching industry has exploded over the past 3 decades. It's because we need that. And obviously we need to find the right one. It's the same with psychologists and shrinks, and you need to find the right person, and you need to make sure that you have someone who will be of use to you. But coaching is one aspect of it, but it's also simply cultivating those relations and how they can help you find out who you are and what you like and what you're good at. I mean, your friends can help you do that, your parents, your children. And when you combine that, you have a better sense of identity. It's those relations, they need to be reciprocal. If they're not reciprocal, you're just a caregiver in each of these relations, then you will be burnt out and you will not benefit from them. So perhaps we need to be a tiny bit more selfish in all those relations. Think about what's in it for me. It sounds nasty when I put it like that, but relationships should be based on reciprocity. And a lot of women lose out because they do not find reciprocity in their relations. So we need reciprocity. Let's be a little bit selfish and ask for something in return. Ask for help, ask for support, ask for reciprocity. So if you've, supported someone through cancer, and once they're better, at some point maybe they can give back to you, and maybe you can ask for help. And so the help that you can get is not just from professionals, but also from that network that you've supported all along.
Basically what you're saying there is do something different that you haven't done before, and it will shift you in different directions. And again, I think this is how we do get smarter, is through these relationships and asking people. And I think it's important to do it more and more. All right, let's move on a little bit to what your thoughts on AI are. And, I talk about AI and augmented work, but the thinking side, the cognitive side that we've all got to try and maintain and improve, especially as we get older. If machines are going to be doing some of that, what's going to happen to us?
That's a good question. I think that older workers will have the upper hand because they have been trained cognitively to think critically and to analyze data with a critical mind before AI was available. And so they have more of a critical mind. They can analyze the data and the output produced by the AI tools that they use. They can analyze that output with a critical mind. So paradoxically, we've long said that, older workers are less good with digital tools. That's the opposite, the other way around with AI. They probably prompt better. They're better at doing prompts because they know exactly what to look for, and they are better at using AI like an assistant to augment their skills. Whereas the young ones, and I'm worried about my own children, They use it with less of a critical mind, and they've never developed the skills to write a whole essay with no help at all, with no outside help. And when I look at the way I developed my own cognitive skills, writing was a big process, was an important element of developing a critical mind, the ability to think, the ability to ask questions, the ability to analyze a subject, and basically writing is necessary to think. So if you can no longer write, can you still think as well? So the positive way of looking at it is that I think older workers have an advantage there because they developed those skills, whereas younger ones may be at risk of never developing those cognitive skills. The negative way of looking at it is that maybe we will all let those skills get atrophied. And that's probably one of my biggest fears. I call it the Wall-E effect. Are you familiar with that Pixar movie from 2008? Yes. With, there's this little robot left on Earth to clean up the mess made by humans, and humans left and went on this big spaceship. And after a couple of generations, because they automated every task, everything in the ship is automated. They are on those little flying chairs and they are connected to computers all the time. So they stopped working, they stopped walking, they stopped thinking, and they can no longer do anything by themselves. And the film is beautiful because at the end they learn to walk again, right? Make the first step and think again and grow plants and things, do everything from scratch again with no help of machines. But I personally am afraid that because I write less now, I do use generative AI, like this very efficient assistant, an assistant I cannot completely trust. I need to check everything, but it's an assistant that is a hardworking one. And so I write less. I do combine things, etc. But I don't do everything from scratch with no help at all. I use it. And I'm afraid that my writing skills and perhaps someday my ability to think, will get atrophied, and that I will fall prey to the Wall-E effect and be like those humans on the spaceship who can no longer do anything by themselves. The same has happened with calculating. I started using a calculating machine when I was a teenager, and now I'm not sure I can do divisions, and even with pen and paper, it will take time for me to be sure that I get to the right result. I can no longer calculate. My memory is atrophied. I used to know a lot of phone numbers by heart when I was young. I no longer have to, so I no longer do. So do I exercise my memory enough? Maybe not. So, this atrophy of skills has already started. Is it going to continue on and get worse? That's my biggest worry.
Now, that's interesting as well. The older you are, the more things you have done, like having to write things, having to read a book, take notes, put that into an article or something like that. Yes, nowadays, as older people, we can use generative AI to help, but I think you're also managing the process, which is another aspect to it. Whereas I think what the young people might be doing, and I think a whole lot of people in marketing are doing, is just saying, write me an article, 800 words, 600 words, here's the 5 keywords, and it kicks it out, and we get a lot of mush. And that's where I think things will change. And we were talking about relational stuff there, is one way you can have an identity is to stand out for, in some sort of niche that's important that people want to follow. And not necessarily trying to chase followers, and again, creating a relationship through the writing, even if it is augmented with AI. I do know with my articles now, I do use AI a lot. I base them all on the note-taking that I've been taking for years in note-taking apps. Then I interrogate those notes and rewrite it and say, look, I didn't want to say that. I want to say this. Can you help me say it that way? And then I still edit it. So there's a interaction going on, and I don't think I'd see that with younger people if they haven't had that experience in life. And the other thing I think about expertise in there is you sort of know when something's not right because you've seen it a lot. Your gut feeling says, something not quite right there. Whereas if you haven't had that expertise or experience, you're not going to see it. So how would you suggest older people who may be making some older people, I don't even know what we call people who are older anymore. Not everybody who's old is old. Some people are young and they're old. So, for example, a 60-year-old woman, 60-year young woman who's doing a transition, not really used AI in the past or maybe digital tools. What would you recommend that they try or have a look at to see if there is some benefit for them in those tools?
I'd like to go back to what you just said about challenging whatever the tool you use gives you, or the result that it's giving. It's a conversation. It's exactly what you said about producing something and challenging it. So as a 60-year young woman, you have, as you said, more crystallized intelligence, more experience, more knowledge. And even if that knowledge is a little bit blurry, you don't remember everything, but you have the ability to challenge whatever is said to you, because whatever you read, because, as you said, it doesn't quite sound right. So this is the greatest way to begin, is to begin this as a conversation. And the app, whatever app it, whether it's Chat GPT or Anthropic's Claude or Gemini or etc. I mean, they have their advantages and drawbacks, each of them, but each of them basically works the same way. It works best as a conversation. And it's not a robot the way we imagine robots in science fiction. It's a networked intelligence. It's algorithms trained on tons of data, produced by humans at first, then produced by other generative AIs more recently, but it's networked intelligence. It will take, an idea from there, an idea from here, and, it will just combine it and give you something that algorithms try to make relevant depending on what your question is or what your prompt is. And so it's you in a network. That's how the use of generative AI can be defined. And this interaction with your critical mind and this network of tons of data produced by tons of humans. And if you start using it like that in a very simple way with this conversation and an ongoing conversation, you make it into a very useful and very life-changing assistant. An assistant you challenge, an assistant you can never fully, completely trust because you have to ask more questions and edit whatever is produced. But I think it's not very threatening and it's not difficult. It's the most intuitive tool we've ever had. And that is why there are already 2 billion users or more. Probably it's underestimated and probably it's more now. So half of the world's population already use it. And again, as a 60-year-old woman, you have more skills to do this conversation properly than someone younger or than someone less experienced. So make the most of it.
That's right. They've just got to try it and see where it goes. But it can help them if they're running a business on their own. For example, what was I doing today? Things weren't showing up. I'm downloading things onto my Mac, downloading a document, and it's not showing up. So I said to AI, it's not showing up. What can I do? And it sent me in a little trail. It gave me one way of fixing it, which fixed it. So this is also becoming a tech advisor to do things. It can help you fix things, and not just for your work, things in the house.
Not just tech. Yeah, exactly. Even things that have to do with the home, how to fix this, how to do that, how to clean this stain, how to, etc. And it brings the whole, YouTube tutoring that was already a big revolution, how to do something, this and that with your hair. You had a video explaining exactly how to do it. So it brings it even one step further, that it's like this universal tutoring tool for little how-to questions, whether it's cooking or fixing things or solving a computer problem or finding the solution for your professional question. That's where I think it works best. The small technical questions, not necessarily the big research questions where I think it's less satisfying. But the small ones, yes. And I've only learned to ask these little technical questions very recently. I've only discovered it months ago rather than years ago, because my first reflex was not to ask ChatGPT or Claude these little how-to questions. And I've discovered that, as you say, it's probably one of the best use cases because it's so fast, so quick. And so as a worker or as a self-employed business person, that is the best use also of those generative AI tools that you can find that will help you get wherever you want to get a lot faster.
Now, that is interesting because it will save you money, which is one of the problems when you're running a little business is, you can spend a lot of money getting technical help, and sometimes you need to do that. But for little bits to get you along the way, it will help and it will save you money. If you're paying for it anyway, you might as well get some benefit. I still believe it's going to be much easier if you can get a really good IT person to come and work out all the wiring. Like if you saw my setup, there's wires everywhere. I would love somebody to come in and clean all that up. But yeah, I think it can solve a lot of problems and save you a lot of money. Well, we've been talking about thinking, so let's just talk a little bit about our cognition. I think you share with Rahaf Harfouch's view that cognition and attention are crucial today, especially navigating in this knowledge world, the world where we really have to think for ourselves and sort things out and be creative. When I use the word creative now, I used to think, you have to do this amazing stuff. But what creativity means is finding a better way to do something. And we were just talking about AI helping us solve problems. So tell me about cognition and attention and why it's so important.
So we're flooded with information. There's so much information overflow now. And since the launch of ChatGPT more than 2.5 years ago now, we've witnessed an exponential rise in texts and images and videos produced now largely by AIs online. And there's so much of it. So we're flooded with it. And there are so many actors asking for bits of our attention just to be able to sell advertisers some of our attention, seconds or milliseconds of our attention. And that has led to degraded attention and degraded attention skills, because to be able to grab our attention, they've made the content even more attention seeking, more colorful, more bright, more loud, more shocking, more provocative, something that will generate anger. That's one way of grabbing your attention. So shock and anger. And so it's become like an addiction. That we need things that are more, wow in some way, that will generate the wow effect. And we can pay less and less attention to simple things that will require time, things that will require hours to understand, like reading a whole book with no distraction, etc. And so we have this need for more dopamine and dopamine hits from social networks, from Instagram and the like. And we move from one tab to another tab on our computer every couple of seconds. We're like fish. Our attention is extremely short. The attention span has reduced from, it was a couple of years ago, it was 12 seconds to 8 seconds on average. And we check our phones all the time. Even if we have no notifications, we'll go there by ourselves and checking if there's something new, if there's some dopamine hit to get. And that's a huge difficulty, because it's not just making us less cognitively skilled, it's making us sick. It's creating stress, anxiety. It's making us sick in every possible way. And the counter movement now, or a lot of people are leaving social networks. So I left Twitter a couple of years ago now after Elon Musk took over. I'm trying to have a more reasonable use of Instagram, mainly for professional aspects. I left Facebook a while ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I try to have no notifications. If I go on a walk outside, I leave the phone at home. So I go outside without the phone so as to practice this attention, this ability to pay attention, to look at what's outside, to look at the trees, to look at the floor, to look at people, to look at faces and things like that. And this is probably the only way we'll be able to regain our ability to have longer attention spans, to pay attention. And now there's a link between attention and cognition, because this ability to pay attention is going to help us maintain or develop cognitive skills, our ability to focus, analyze information, think, and then produce creative things, whatever those creative things are, and make decisions that are sound decisions, because our ability to make decisions in a world of information overflow has also degraded. And it's sometimes we're paralyzed, or we just make bad decisions, whatever those decisions may be. So yes, attention and cognition are the battles of the future. The good thing about 60-year-old women is that some of them, they've already had burnouts sometimes. They've already felt their cognition under threat, or they may think their cognition is under threat because of aging. And so perhaps they have already developed good habits when it comes to developing or to maintaining attention and cognition. So working on your memory, doing things without the phone, like whether it's playing chess or reading a book or going on a walk outside or meditating or doing yoga or doing Pilates. I mean, everything that requires that you leave the phone outside or in a bag is a good thing, is a good activity. And a lot of activities that 60-year-olds are fond of, like a physical activity, or I don't know, whatever it is that you do, for example.
I know you wrote something about seasonality as well recently. How do you think that helps with cognitive vitality? Obviously, we can do more in summer.
Yes, it's interesting because the modern work was largely shaped by industrial work. And industrial work, basically factories with assembly lines that work 24/7 because they need to be, you need to maximize the output. So you have artificial light, that was the electricity revolution, so that you could have the same production, the same productivity, the same output day in, day out, every month of the year, and you didn't care about what season it was. You didn't care how hot it was outside, because you could have this artificial climate-controlled environment where the output could remain the same. And we created shifts so that people could work, teams of people could work all day, all night, and so we could maximize the output. And that's the fantasy of industrial work, that you can be equally productive all the time and work the same number of hours all the time. So Henry Ford created the 40-hour work week and was still left with basically something that looks like the 40-hour work week, 5 days a week. I mean, most people work with that model still, even though we no longer work on assembly lines. And some of us still work in climate-controlled environments, but a lot of us do not. Whether we are on the road to go from, one person to the other to deliver care, to cut people's hair, to clean people's homes, to look after people's children, or to do creative work, we no longer work on assembly lines with a linear, equal, unchanging productivity. So what we are finding also with climate change is that, yes, there are seasons. There are also seasons in our lives, and sometimes we feel tired. And to be able to work productively in creative work or in emotional work, in relational work, it doesn't work with the fiction of equal productivity, of constant productivity. So we are rediscovering, and especially those of us who work very freely, who can choose our own time and how we work, is that, yes, there are seasons. And sometimes, as you just said, perhaps we work best in spring and summer and should be able to sleep more in winter. And perhaps it's the other way around. We want to enjoy outdoors, fun activities outside in summer and work more inside in winter. I mean, depending on where you are and how affected you are by climate change and by climate, and depending on what you do, there are seasonal aspects in the work what we do. And it's a good thing because it will make it possible for us to work more years, and because it will make the work that we do more sustainable, and because it will help us stay healthy longer if we do not strain that, if we do not push ourselves a little bit too much, if we listen to what our bodies need and what the seasons are like. So I think it's an interesting trend. It's not everywhere yet, but that we are learning to make work more seasonal again.
I think for probably 100,000 years it was.
It was when it was agriculture, yes.
That will be in us somehow. We will feel it, we will know it. Okay, one of the things we spoke about in one of our previous episodes was that when women become freelancers, they often only make a minimum wage. And you stress the importance of financial literacy and empowerment for women. So how do these financial realities and the need for financial resilience impact for women to make, say, a transition into independent work?
So they got to think about their retirement savings, and they have to think about that as early as possible. And yes, it's still the same that women freelancers earn less than their male counterparts. It's still the same that women in the second or the third stage of their career earn less, and sometimes earn less even than in the previous stage of their career, because following the motherhood penalty, so the financial impact of having a child, they never go back on average to where they were before. And so the gap between mothers and non-mothers is as big as it's ever been, sadly. So no progress there. But there is progress, I think, in information, in knowledge about all that, and in financial literacy. So what I've seen is that over the past 5 or 6 years, there have been many more media, many more people offering some kind of training to improve financial literacy, and also political lobbying, so that women who work part-time, I think it's also the case in Australia, that they are encouraged or even forced to contribute to their pension systems fully. I mean, not just partially, but fully. And so I think we have a better knowledge of that, and we are thinking of that perhaps earlier. And that's a good thing. And hopefully it will have an impact on the gender pension gap in the future. So I think also more women know that part-time work is a trap, that there is a triple penalty associated to part-time work, whether that's as an employee or as a freelancer. Freelancers also have to take into account, because if you work part-time, not only are you paid less, but then you will be paid less in the future because your pension will be lower. And the third penalty is that you're usually in jobs or careers that in general pay less and have less pay progression. Working part-time is not possible in every kind of jobs, and the jobs where you work part-time are usually not associated with as much progression as full-time work. So that's where I would say the progress is. More financial literacy overall, and more political awareness, and a few political decisions or laws that have been passed recently that are protecting women in that regard.
Laetitia, is there something else you'd like to add? And then we'll find out how we can get in contact with you.
I don't know. I have a blank with such open questions suddenly. I don't know what to add.
we have covered most of everything, I think, which is really, really good, because it's been wonderful talking to you again. So, Laetitia, where do they find you? You've mentioned Instagram.
Yes, Instagram. So my name, Laetitia Vitaud, and you can find my account, but also my newsletter, my newsletter in English, Laetitia at Work, on Substack. I still publish about one piece a month. It used to be more, but as you yourself have found with your podcast, too much is not sustainable. So once a month is the frequency that fits, that works best. So I write these long pieces, like the recent one you mentioned about making work seasonal. So that's where you can get in touch with me and answer this newsletter, and I receive an email and you can get in contact.
And LinkedIn as well.
And LinkedIn as well.
Well, Laetitia, thank you for being my guest again.
Thank you, Nigel. It's been my pleasure to speak to you for a third time.
Well, I'd like to do it again, maybe in a year's time or something, to keep in contact.
Thank you, Nigel, and have a good night.
That's all for today's Wisepreneurs podcast. Age is no barrier when you're a wisepreneur crafting a purpose-driven career. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe, leave a review and share it with your network. Visit wisepreneurs.com.au to join my newsletter for exclusive strategies and ideas, and connect with me on LinkedIn for more insights. I'm Nigel Rawlins, and I'll see you next time to keep building your future with impact.